This poem, Patience, is one of those poems that Hopkins um, considers in terms of personal experience that we all have one time or another. He does it with a poem entitled Peace as well, like what is peace and how do we acquire peace. I'll cover that in another upload, but this this time he's talking about the virtue of patience and what it's all about in terms of our experiencing it and how it affects us in different ways. Having patience or having to have patience, which is demanded upon us in life. Things don't always go our way, and we pray for things to right themselves. To change from uh, our adversity to something better, a better state of life. So that's what happens in this poem, and I might begin by saying it's not an easy poem. Someday I'll go back over these poems and rate them in terms of difficulty. This one I would give probably a 7 in terms of its abstruseness, its cloudiness, its obscurity. It's hard to break through it and understand what he's talking about. So, with that said, I'll read through the poem and then we'll go back and tear it apart as we normally do. All right, so patience. Patience, hard thing. The hard thing but to pray, but bid for. Patience is. Patience who asks, wants war, wants wounds, weary his times, his tasks, to do without, take tosses and obey. Rare patience roots in these, and these away nowhere. Natural heart's ivy, patience masks our ruins of wrecked past purpose. These she basks, purple eyes and seas of liquid leaves all day. We hear our hearts grate on themselves. It kills to bruise them dearer. Yet the rebellious wills of us do bid God bend to him, even so. And where is he who more and more distills delicious kindness? He is patient. Patience fills his crisp combs, and that comes those ways we know. Okay, so I warned you, it's not easy, but hopefully I can make it clear. All right, and I'll try to do that by tearing it apart. So let's begin. First line: patience, hard thing. Okay, so there's no question about what he says there. All right, patience is a hard thing to bear with in our lives, and he even says it's a hard thing to pray. Most people do find it difficult to pray, set aside a time, and get into a real prayer, you know, getting close to God, talking to God. That's not easy, but you might say it can come with experience, with practice. All right. So the hard thing, but to pray, but bid for. So when we pray a petition prayer, we bid for patience. All right. And patience is that. So let me explain that. In other words, if we're undergoing some kind of adversity or some kind of a long-term illness, for instance, okay, and we pray for relief. So, or maybe we may pray for patience to deal with it, right? Because we know that it's out of our hands otherwise. So to pray for patience to deal with an adversity, whatever it might be, let's say a loss, grief, or sickness, or even loss of job, loss of family, career, whatever. Okay, so when you're in the midst of that, that's what patience is. And sometimes, we get impatient and we would rather deal with something concrete than that which we cannot put our hands on. All right. So patience who asks wants war. Now, war can be literally or figuratively, because the war could symbolize dealing with something tangible, an adversity of some kind of tangible nature. He wants wounds that he can deal with. It's easier to deal with a concrete situation than to deal with the patience to deal with that concrete situation. So one gets weary, from day to day, his tasks, to do without, to take tosses and obey, the law of God. Rare patience roots in these. All right, now stop there. So it's easier to deal with the reality of the present than this abstraction. And then he talks about day-to-day life can be weary at times, and his tasks to do without, all right, to go without the things you want or need, all right, for existence, for a better state of life. And we take tosses and we obey. Now, this line here, rare patience roots in these. So now he's getting metaphorical. Symbolically, he's suggesting that these adversities that we deal with on a day-to-day basis plants the roots of patience, which now becomes like a bush or a foliage or vegetation that is going to grow. And our ability to deal with things will be a little easier in that respect. In other words, the patience symbolically as a bush or any vegetation that grows and spreads, okay, and flourishes. So also patience will grow and flourish within us. And these kinds of experiences, like taking tosses and doing without and obeying the laws of God and man, and the things that we don't like, we have to do. And then the next three lines, and these away, in other words, not having these, removing these experiences, nowhere. In other words, you will not get any patience. It won't be anywhere. It won't exist. Will be impulsive. Will be, angry. So now he furthers this image of vegetation growing, and now he's referring to it as English ivy, which spreads and covers, let's say, the side of a university building. The whole building is covered in ivy. So natural heart's ivy, patience masks our ruins of past wrecked experiences. In other words, the things that we wanted in the past and were never fulfilled or never realized. He calls those our wrecked past purpose. In other words, the things that we had a purpose in achieving, but they were wrecked, and now they're ruins in our memory. All right, so there's another metaphorical image there of a ruined building. However, the building can be covered with the ivy, and in such experiences that, it will hide the ugliness of the ruins of the building. Now, apply that to, man, that your past purposes can be covered with ivy, metaphorically being, a new purpose. These she basks, purple eyes and seas of liquid leaves all day. The ivy, it's it spreads, and looking at it from afar, it looks like a sea. All the bright green leaves and the berries, here they're purple, and seas of liquid leaves all day. I don't know if you get that image now. So, in other words, having patience would be equivalent to covering our past losses and weary times and the tosses and the doing without. All those things can be covered, hidden from view, by, metaphorically, the ivy, suggesting our dealing with patience and saying, oh, well, that's the way life goes. We must move on. Tomorrow's another day. Things will get brighter, okay? So that's the octave. And in the sestet, we hear our hearts grate on themselves. It kills the bruised endearer. Yet the rebellious wills of us do bid God bend to him even so. So here he's suggesting that, the things don't get better, but, it's not easy because our hearts grate on the losses that we experience. It kills the bruised and dearer, more so, Yet the rebellious wills of us, we rebel against accepting God's will. All right, accepting God's will. We rebel against that. Yet the rebellious wills of us, even so, we do bid God bend to him. Even so. In other words, we ask God to help us. And where is he who more and more distills delicious kindness? There's no answer. That same old mantra of the dead letter office. Hopkins says he sends his prayers out to a friend, far away. He says it that way. Never hearing back from him. So he's suggesting that there, in that line. And where is he who more and more distills delicious kindness? Now, I like the word distills here because he's referring to, he's going to refer to nature's pollination of the flowers and creating the honey. And that's a slow process. It doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen overnight. So God, in his conducting the things of life, is patient. He doesn't rush things. The bees don't rush things. So it's a long, drawn out, incremental kind of experience. Happens over a period of time. So if God's that way, so ought we to be the same. He is patience. Patience fills his crisp combs, and that comes those ways we know. Here he's suggesting that the ways we know are the things that were mentioned in the octave. We just have to deal with these things. It's not something that we can flip a switch and things change. So patience, literally is a virtue, okay? Something that we have to work at. And it reaps rich rewards if we do that. So let me look at my analysis, and then we'll go back and read the poem again. The poem is an exercise in his use of prosody. That would be his word choice, the syntax, the arrangement of the words on the line, the meaning of the line, some archaic, the reversal of the subject and verb. Sometimes he has the direct object first, followed by a verb, followed by the subject, and other devices of symbolism, as we saw with the ivy, the rhythm, rhyme, and diction, all for an overall effect of poetic construction resulting in a beautiful sonnet. I mean, if you look at it in terms of its structured, rules following those of a sonnet. All right, so it's a work of genius, but it's challenging and demands close attention to gain its full appreciation. And like its title, it requires patience and work to understand its meaning, but also like its closing line, where, the sweetness is found in the combs of the honey that the bee pollinated from the flowers, so also will we find satisfaction and sweetness in the meaning of this poem. Right? So there's kind of like an allegory here. Overall, the poem is a meditation on the value of the virtue of patience, especially as it relates to our act of praying in the first line. Hard to pray. The octave considers the difficulties presented in daily living, acknowledging that one must endure failures and adversity, but accept his state of affairs by obedience to God's will. A hymn puts it in these words, "Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." And that poem was written around the same time by a contemporary of Hopkins, and I wonder if he was aware of the poem. A hymn. The first line acknowledges that it's difficult just to pray. As Hopkins averred in another poem, he sometimes feels that his prayers are like letters to a friend far away, which all go to a dead letter office, no reply. In another poem with the same idea, he begins with these words, "Godhead here in hiding, whom I do adore, masked by these bare shadows, shape and nothing more," implying that it's difficult offering prayers to one who does not seem to acknowledge his presence. So, Hopkins doesn't avoid this. He brings it right out into the open. And, he speaks to God almost like someone in a court, as we saw, "Thou art indeed just, Lord," where he calls God Sir. And, he says that, things are probably just here, but from my point of view at this moment, it doesn't seem so. Well, that's what he's like averring to in this poem in a kind of a stretched way that he doesn't get it, all right? But he does lead to a conclusion in the sestet, as the sestet is supposed to do, that, God is trying us with little things so that we're able to handle big things in life, okay? That message comes through in the sestet. So patience is like waiting for something to happen. It can be a difficult time and create stress. Lines 2 and 3, patience who asks wants war, wants wounds, wants meaning being in the need of it or a desire for it, suggesting that the presence of the actual war, now not necessarily literally war, but confrontation with adversity, that idea of being wounded is being better than being patient waiting to get wounded or getting hurt. It's easier to deal with the hurt and get it over with, deal with it here and now. So it's easier to take direct action with a concrete situation than to wait in fear and anticipation of something nebulous, something that is out there and we're fearing it. There's an apprehension about it. All right. Weary his times his tasks. That's true. From day to day, life isn't always easy. It might be monotonous, doing the same thing, not seeing where you're going. That idea. To do without, take tosses, these are examples. To do without this and take tosses on that, and to obey the law. All these things suggest that it's exhausting to do day-to-day work. And likewise, wearying to accept deprivation, experience failures, and be obedient. So he goes on to say that this test of character is needed to demonstrate the mettle of an individual. How are we going to know, what kind of inner strength this person has if he hasn't been tested? That idea. So anything less than this acceptance is not true patience. And let me just jump back to the poem, and I'll show you what that happens. Let me see here. Oh, the word is like nowhere. Here it is. Rare patience roots in these, and take these away. Nowhere does it grow. It does not grow. So, to do without, take tosses, obey. All of these things are, rare patience roots in these. Rare patience because this is exceptional to have a patience, but through experience. I don't want to use the word practice, but that's the idea, though. Like going through these experiences, one must have them in order to develop and grow true patience. And these away, removing them, nowhere will it ever grow. So that was my point that I went back to. So let me see where I left off. All right. So, and these away, nowhere says that if these conditions, these wearying circumstances do not exist, then true patience cannot grow here. One's mettle will not be tested. All right. Now, last three lines of the octave, remember that's the first part, steeped in symbolism. Speaking of natural heart's ivy, he uses the allegory of English ivy profusely growing and covering ruins, those past failures and the lack of our past achievements, our ruins of wrecked past purpose. He closes the sestet with the image of the ivy flourishing in a sea of purple berries and clusters, resembling a sea of liquid leaves, basking or soaking happily in the sun. So it's a change of ugliness to beauty, all right, in that regard. The sestet continues the acknowledgement that patience is difficult. Our hearts grate on themselves. It kills. To bruise them dearer. Nevertheless, we continue to ask God to bend or subdue our rebellious will. We acknowledge that we're being rebellious, and we ask God to, subdue our rebellious will to Him, even though it hurts us. We ask for God's help in getting us through. It's kind of like the expression, "Oh, God, help me," in this time of grief. God, help me, we ask for God's help in getting us through difficult times with the mindset, even so, thy will be done. In other words, it's not for me to decide, you're in charge. So Hopkins then raises the question of where God is that distills his kindness upon us. The metaphor of honey is appropriate when we consider the amount of time the bees work at gathering pollen and returning it to the hive where it gathers in the honeycombs to become honey. The implication is that the prayer is answered by Him, that more and more distills delicious kindness, we are told. Okay? It does happen eventually, all right? But not in our time, all right? It's in God's time. All right. So we're told that he is patient, God is, and fills his crisp calms, and that comes those ways we know. We know what it takes for patience to develop. Patience will transform the way we live for the better. We know this, okay? And it doesn't make it much easier knowing it, but, we do know it. We must ask God to bend our still rebellious wills to his will, and patience will take root in us and flourish in sweetness in our life of prayer. So, not in our time, but in God's time. His will be fulfilled, but only as God manages it, not us. So, the ways we know are our experiences. All right, we might think of those, for example, who are recovering from any kind of adversity, like in a hospital, from injuries or sickness, and during their period of recovery, it's not easy, but they know they must bend their will to God and accept His will, and that's the virtue, and that's probably the best form of prayer, saying, "Thy will be done." In the Our Father, Lord's Prayer, "Thy will be done." All right, so I'll read it one more time and see if it has better meaning. Patience, hard thing. The hard thing, but to pray. But bid for patience is. Patience, who asks, wants war, wants wounds, weary his times, his tasks, to do without, take tosses, and obey. Rare patience roots in these, and these away nowhere. Natural heart's ivy, patience masks our ruins of wrecked past purpose. These she basks, purple eyes, and seas of liquid leaves all day. We hear our hearts grate on themselves. It kills to bruise them dearer. Yet the rebellious wills of us do bid God bend to him, even so. And where is he who more and more distills delicious kindness? He is patient. Patience fills his crisp calms, and that comes those ways we know. So another poem that kind of alludes to the same idea is "The Stranger in the Night." The lantern in the night going by, and we are told at the end of that poem that God is with that person from birth until death, and he kind of like watches over that person. So here, the same idea. He is patient. He knows our needs, and eventually, in his time, fills his crisp calms, and that comes the ways we know, and that is from experience.